Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year 0. Today, I have a special post-Afghanistan episode. Mr. Matthew Hoh and Mr. Scott Spaulding joined me. We discussed their time in Iraq and Afghanistan, some of the lessons they learned, some of the things they saw, the corruption, some of the scandals, and how they're processing the entire ending of the war in Afghanistan and what they expect to come of it and how they expect it to be moving forward. I was really excited to do this episode because Matthew writes so much on the terror wars and the happenings in Afghanistan, and he works real closely with people with PTSD, and Scott has his Why I'm Anti-War podcast. So I was really excited to do this episode with these two guys, and it was great. It was a fun experience, and it's a long episode, but there's a lot here, and it was a great conversation that I think you will all enjoy. But first, RyanBunting.com. For all of your graphic design needs, go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and a great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and Pete Quinones' podcast logo for Free Man Beyond the Wall. So go to RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs and buy his damn book, Project Manicore. It's a good one. Also, thank you, as always, Mr. Tom Burton, for the music. You have become the star of the show in many ways, and I'm glad that people enjoy your music. Enjoy the show. Okay, recording in progress. I'm here with Mr. Scott Spaulding and my dogs. And Matthew Hoh. What's going on, guys?
Hey, good to be on. Good to be on with you, Tommy and Scott.
Shana Tova.
Yeah.
You know, this is I'm trying, because they can push this door open anytime they want. But I'm trying to see if maybe just having it closed is psychologically enough to keep them out, but I don't know if it's enough to keep them quiet. So
well, what's amazing and what the folks don't know is we've been talking for more than 20 minutes, just the three of us, before we started recording, and those dogs did not bark until you pressed record. I mean, for the last 20 some odd minutes, they have been quiet, and then we literally just started recording, and now they're like, "Hey, Dad, guess what? We're here."
There's a monster outside. Go look. Well, no, so I wanted to have both y'all on because y'all are both veterans. And did y'all both serve in Iraq? Am I right there?
Iraq twice and Afghanistan twice for me.
Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah.
Both of
them.
them.
Twice in Iraq for me and once in Afghanistan.
Once in Afghanistan. Okay. So y'all been to both places. And I meant to ask Afghanistan, not Iraq. I don't know why I said Iraq, but whatever. Afghanistan's in the news. That's what I wanted to talk about. So what I think would be kind of interesting, I know specifically that Matt has been in touch with some of the interpreters and some of the soldiers that you worked with in Iraq. I know for sure. I'm not sure about your relationships with people in Afghanistan. Do you have any of those lasting relationships out of Afghanistan as well?
Yeah, I do. And I actually just was contacted by another person today, an interpreter who worked with me in 2009 in Afghanistan. He's been in the U.S. for a while now. He's been a U.S. citizen since 2019, which is great. Wonderful, wonderful person. He believed in what we were doing there, even though it was all bullshit. he believed in it. He wanted a better country. And
Right.
this is what's so tragic, is that so many people in both Iraq and Afghanistan wanted what was best for their country. And, what we gave them and what occurred was the opposite of that. Right.
Yeah.
But no, and then also too, I like to hear what Scott says about this as well, because I know Scott was involved with civil affairs. And so he was very much involved with Iraqi and Afghan people directly. When I went to Afghanistan after being in Iraq twice, I went to Afghanistan saying I would never make any Afghan friends, because what had happened to my Iraqi friends was that, many of them were killed. Many of them I couldn't hear from anymore, lost contact with them, no idea what became of them, if they were still alive. They were living lives in unimaginable hell. So when I went to Afghanistan, I didn't make friends with the Afghans, but over the last 10, 12 years, I've made friends with a number of Afghans. So I've been in touch with a bunch of them and have seen their families. They and their families these last few weeks try and get out. Most have been successful, including some have been just the news has been so terrible about this. The reporting has been so inaccurate. But a friend of ours, a friend and his family were able to fly to Pakistan the other day from Mazar Sharif, and hopefully once the Kabul airport gets open, more people will be able to leave.
And Scott, like when it comes to the relationships that you formed over there, are there people that you're still in touch with that you're hearing from during this time?
Yeah. So I as far we got real, like kind of similar with Matthew, like on my first deployment, we got very close. Our interpreter did get, this is what, like before the special immigration visa even came to be a thing in 2004, this was circa 2004, that was just in development. This idea that, oh yeah, we probably should give due consideration to people that are on our side. So our first interpreter, he was a great guy. He is a great guy. And we got really close with him. He lived with us. He was in our hooch. He slept in our building. And there's always this, I don't know about with you, Matthew, but like later on, so we got very close with him. He came to the States, and interestingly, he kind of struggled when he got here. It was big. He moved to San Francisco because the team, a Marine that he'd worked with before, lived there, kind of helped set him up, but also San Francisco is not an easy place to live in. Cost of living wise, he struggled. And interestingly, when, a few, full decade later, when ISIS took Western Iraq, he went back to run he was running checkpoints just east of, like around Abu Ghraib, like just around east of Fallujah to keep, to keep the front line from moving any closer to Baghdad. But as time went on, we got interested in our interpreters' lives on my next deployment, but they were a little, I think, I wonder how much the systems in place that L3 put in, where they were rotating interpreters and they kind of owned the interpreters, and that relationship with them was a little bit, I don't know if it was just the position or the command I was in handled things differently, but the interpreters slept in their own hooch, separate from us. They were kept at arm's distance. They weren't necessarily trusted. There have probably been some incidents that drove that, perhaps. But we also worked a lot with civilians, and it's hard not to when you, whether it's interpreters or just, and these are the people that aren't going to get any special due consideration. And like we worked with civilian contractors to do all of the projects that were supposed to make counterinsurgency work. I was and contractors that worked with us got killed, left their children orphaned because they had collaborated with us, and the people who murdered them orphaned their children, I should say. Yeah. Because they collaborated with us on projects that we thought were going to improve the livelihoods of people there, and all of our happy photo opportunity projects of building a soccer stadium and where there used to be a garbage dump in Fallujah, kind of came to naught. So by the time I was in Afghanistan in 2009, about, 5 years later. I was a little jaded on that. And the unfortunate truth is, America was doling out a lot of money, and we were the biggest game in town. And if you spoke a little bit of English, you could get one of the best paying jobs an Afghan could get, probably. And so at civil affairs, we also had to teach, and I taught at the civil affairs school. We also had to be cognizant and start teaching from lessons learned that interpreters will do shady things, like try to negotiate in a cut for a deal. Like if we're building a bridge and we're going to pay 10 grand for it. He's going to tell the contractor to bid what to bid, because he knows what we're thinking. He's going to tell the contractor what to bid and get 10% of the take. You know what I mean? So we had to be very conscientious of how we worked with them. But ultimately, I don't doubt that they were people that wanted the best for their family and in their country, and did want to make improvements. And definitely, like I'm picturing contract one for just really sweet guy named Delaware I worked with on my last deployment. He was like my go-to contractor. He'd do anything. He'd come in at a good price, and just the guy that he always, like, even when the job wasn't good enough, he'd tear the whole thing down and start over again if we said it wasn't the way we wanted it. You know what I mean? Because he wanted to. So I when I think about people, I worry about him. But yeah, the relationship with interpreters there and whatnot, it varied how close you were, how your command handled your relationship with them. But ultimately, like, it was one of the worst things when I realized how, and it kind of first happened with those contractors that got killed for my first, when that one first happened, it was probably 2-3 months after we got home, that we kind of use and lose people. The war machine was going to go on. And it was really a real disappointment in, like, what I thought we were there to do, that, no one else really lost any sleep over the fact that we were going to splash a bunch of money around in a place where there aren't a lot of opportunities, and we're partially responsible for reducing those other opportunities that are out there. They come to us, some of them with many of them with the best of intentions. And then, we're not protecting that. We're not going out of our way to really protect them, and like you said, like keeping some of that professional distance of maybe not wanting to make, like, the guy can work for you, but maybe knowing it's not the best for him to be seen with you. The people in town will know that he's getting money from you, but trying to manage that relationship of, I like you as a person, and maybe for the best, it's, I don't know. I never really figured out like I said, I really liked that guy. I really liked Delaware. I really liked some of our interpreters, and I worry about their well-being and that of their family. But I just don't know what could be done. I'm a person that really thinks that we should open our doors to people in danger across the world, regardless of whether they work for us or not, in a certain sense. If the Taliban is as bad as our worst fears, or even relatively worse than life in the United States, I think people should be able to make their way here regardless, for what it's worth,
Yeah. I mean, that's a compassionate statement, and there's nothing wrong with holding that, feeling towards people, especially people that, y'all are under some of the biggest stresses probably you've ever experienced it in your life during these times, and it's got to be difficult to be apathetic to the people that are helping you, right? And keep them at arm's length, and treat them as if they're just a tool or an object to gain some goal, whatever that goal may be. And obviously in Matthew's situation where he's talking about that, he's trying to keep himself emotionally healthy and protect himself emotionally. But when you're under so much stress, I don't know how you can completely separate your emotions from your daily interactions. I don't know if that's even humanly possible, and stay human at the same time, not become some sort of a sociopath, right? And going through your day-to-day life as a just an animated machine. I don't know if that's any way to live either.
Well, I mean, I think that's a lot of it, Tommy, is that you go and you do these things and you live this way for, a better part of a year, or some guys 15 months. Hey, my one friend, Matt Farwell, he was with the 25th Brigade of the 25th Infantry Division in Afghanistan in 05, 06, I believe. And they were there for like 16 or 17 months or something like that. They had the longest combat deployment of any unit throughout both wars, I mean, and you lose that. It's not just because you're taking part in war and you're seeing things and you're doing things that destroy your humanity. I mean, that's part of it. But some of it is just the way that you carry yourselves, the tempo. And I'm sure Scott is familiar with this. When we would lose people, which happened, particularly my second deployment, quite often in Anbar province, quite often, you just went along with it. You'd lose a guy that you were like, I would lose a guy I was friends with, a guy I loved, or we lost a sergeant major that was just, I mean, Jesus, if Joe Ellis, what he would have done for his community, this country, I mean, that's the kind of guy that was killed, and then on and on and on, all the different losses you take, and you just keep moving forward. I mean, you have this little memorial service, where everyone comes out and you all kneel and you all go up, and they've got I'm sure people have seen the photos of what those look like, usually like some type of wooden cross arrangement with the boots and a rifle stuck into it, and dog tags hanging off the rifle, that type of memorial. But those are quick. They last 10, 15 minutes. Everyone kind of goes in front of it, says a prayer, takes a knee, whatever, and then you move on. You're right back in the tempo of things. And I remember when in this case, when we lost Sergeant Major Ellis, and a bunch of people that day, including an Iraqi interpreter, Sammy, who was a fucking great guy. We lost those guys to a suicide bomber in Barwana. The idea that you just keep moving forward. Like you don't, there's not a chance to actually mourn. There's not a chance to actually recognize what happened. I mean, the tempo of what you're doing is so sustained and so high that there's just not that chance to sit with it. To process it, right? To accept it. All those things that you're supposed to do with grief. And that has an effect. And then when you finally do have a chance to deal with it, to sit with it, accept it, process it, whatever, is after you're home. And then it's just like a ton of bricks falling on top of you. Right. So yeah.
And we talked about that in the last episode we recorded about learning to come to terms with these emotions and actually like put them in the forefront of your mind and actually deal with them. Because if you don't deal with them, that's part of what causes the injury, right? The mental injury that you're dealing with is the lack of ability to process and actually accept and deal with these emotions that are actually running through you. And by the time you get home and you've seen this, 30 times or 40 times or 500 times or however many times you've seen it and experienced it and dealt with it, like you're doing it all at one time. And that's a lot to process and really deal with all at one time.
Well, yeah, and I'll let Scott chime in a second, but just because otherwise I'll forget. I'll take my TBI privilege and go first, because otherwise I'll forget. No, I mean, in this case, when I come home from that second deployment, and we got home kind of end of April, end of April, I guess it was. But by the time I actually got home back to the East Coast, and I was living in a DC area in Northern Virginia, was Memorial Day weekend. And so where was I Memorial Day weekend but Arlington National Cemetery? And that's like really the first time I have a chance to accept this, to deal with it. And it's like getting hit by a truck. I mean, like showing up at Arlington Cemetery on Memorial Day weekend and, having to go at that point in 2007. Now I guess you go and it's all, if I remember right, it's all digital, electronic kiosks, and you type in the name of the person that tells you where it is. back in '07, you still had to go up to a person at a booth and say, hey, I'm looking for these people. And you feel guilty about asking for too many people, right? So I only asked for 3 people because I felt guilty about taking too much time in line, and weird about it. So, right. But yeah, then I'm walking over there and you're still numb to it. And then, and in this case, it was Joe Ellis who I come across his grave. I get over to section 60, I believe, is where most of the Iraq and Afghan veterans are buried. And, I just kind of make a beeline over there and I'm walking and I realize I'm at section 60. I look down and whose grave am I standing at but Joe Ellis's? And then it hits me, right? After 9 months, 10 months of not dealing with it, it hits me right there and I collapse and it's the shock of it is devastating. And then now you've entered into a new part of your life where you have to deal with this. And it's yeah, I mean, we don't do our young men and women favors coming out of the military by allowing them to encounter their grief this way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was just watching For the 25, which was a little mini documentary about the guys from 3-5 and Sangin. Around 2011, I think, is when they were there, and it was particularly, they mentioned it was the core group of these guys they were scout snipers that had come over from 2-5 and joined 3-5 for the deployment as augmentees. So they kind of had their own little group, and then of course with scout snipers, and they're dispersed amongst the various companies in the battalion, So the only time they see anybody outside of their own team, but from the rest of the people from their platoon, is at the memorial service for one of their friends, another friend. It's the like one team at one fob, one team in another fob, another team in another fob, and then only when one of them get killed do they get to see each other all together. And it was the exact same thing that I experienced when one of our guys, civil affairs. Likewise, it's usually one sergeant, maybe 1 or 2 people with every company, dispersed across the entire division AO. So you have 40 or 50 guys, and we're broken out 2 by 2 with each infantry company. And so when Bill Kerr got killed, and I was part of the I was at the headquarters, regimental headquarters, kind of as a office, pogue, but when he got killed, it was like, okay, well, we're gonna take everyone up we're gonna pull everyone in that we can for the memorial service and get them up to where the memorial service is being held. And it was the same feeling of the only time you got to see your friends and commiserate, because you're working with the infantry guys and you're with them also, and you make friends with them, but your guys, the guys you trained with, you only see when one of your friends gets killed. You get together, you have a few minutes to see each other and laugh and joke a little bit and mourn at the same time. And then the next time the whole team gets back, the whole unit gets back together is when you're on your way home.
Yeah.
And then when you get home and you go, like he said, to Arlington, we would go for a while. We were going, he was a strange one. We would go on his birthday, we would go on Memorial Day, and we would go on the day he died. And you would always find another one of the guy from our unit there on one of those days. And I think you still do. Or at least there's some sign that somebody was there that day if you miss them. I've always, and it's strangely, well, not so strangely, growing up in that area, in a military family, my great grandfather's buried, my entire family. The only cemetery anyone I know is buried in is Arlington.
Wow.
My great grandfather, great grandmother, grandfather, grandmother on both sides. My father's already got his spot picked out along the columbarium wall. And I think he was angling to have his ashes interred with me. That's how far into it he's thinking about these things these days. But so it was for a long time. I just thought of it as like, as far as I knew, that was the only cemetery in the world growing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was huge. And it only dawned on me really when one of my friends was killed and buried there, what it really is. You know what I mean? Just this massive war dead memorial. And it does hit you different. It really hits you when somebody, I was there when grandpa was buried there, but that was a different thing. That's, but when it's, that experience of being there and seeing, we obviously couldn't be there for the funeral, but seeing his wife there and his two children that he never met, you know what I mean? Because she was pregnant with them when he was killed. Like that's when it really just, it does a number on you,
right?
And then seeing that every single other stone there has the same story, especially in section 60,
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah, you can. The thing is, too, you walk through it, and we've all done so many different deployments, and you're not even thinking you're visiting somebody, and you stumble across somebody else. We all know so many, and it maybe you even didn't know that guy that well, but you remember it. You're like, I remember that unit. They okay, yeah, I think that was, and so there's a lot of that too. There's a lot of the dead that are just on the fringes of your memory, of your remembrances, or that you were associated with, that are all just kind of there. Again, you walk through it and you're just going to come across, besides the people you're actively looking for, but guys that, oh shit, I remember. Yeah, damn, I remember that. I forgot about that. I think that's one thing, is that there's so much. I just don't think people really get how violent these wars were, and how just the amount of, how many of us are alive because of our body armor and our vehicle armor. Section 60 would have been filled up very quickly, and they would have been, if we didn't have the body armor and the vehicle armor that we have now. I would have come home in my company. I would have lost dozens of Marines in my company if we didn't have it. I had at least a half dozen Marines who survived more than 10 IED detonations against their vehicles. Now, we were doing route clearance, so we were out looking for the IEDs. But like I said, I had about a half dozen guys who had 10 or more IED strikes against their vehicles, not near misses, like directly. In the number of guys who had multiple strikes, and how many of us just walked away from it, right? But this is why we're dealing with the TBIs and stuff now. But so I don't think people get the level of intensity these wars actually were, and how lucky we are because of our armor that so many of us are here. But certainly to go walk through there, because so many of us did so many deployments, it's really easy to stumble across things that, you kind of have forgotten about, or oh shit, or the worst part is that you sit there and you say, do I know this guy? I knew the unit. That's about the right time frame. Am I thinking of the right person? That kind of thing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No,
go ahead.
I just saw something, and maybe one of you could, I think Matthew, you might have mentioned it earlier today. I saw, just to kind of decenter us a little bit. Like, the fact is that I saw an article, or a quote from an article about interviews with women. I think it was from Adnan Gopal, maybe, but interviews with women in Afghanistan, basically saying that, it was something like of every woman interviewed, they could name at least 10 family members that had been killed in the war.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, every woman interviewed has undergone that tragedy like 10 times over. Yeah. Did you come? I don't know that that's it. It was something in that ballpark. I only caught a glance of it, but just to think about, our FOB on my last deployment, just to the north of it, I was at Inkerman and Sangin, and I just only the other day learned that Inkerman was a famous battle from the Crimean War. was always wondering what the root of that name was. Sorry, that's an aside, but just north of it was a cemetery, and I would just kind of look out at it sometimes when we were up by the gate, because it was and wonder, you know, the burial rituals that happen. And my first deployment, we ended up on body detail in Fallujah because we was one of the ways we made ourselves useful at civil affairs in the midst of the battle was like to arrange for an imam to get his congregation to sort of help us collect bodies and dispose of them. And, you know, I and of course, Muslim tradition kind of dictates that you get somebody buried as quickly as possible and, you know, pointed in the right direction and whatnot. And I wonder how many of those people, because I was thinking about war graves, you know, part of the thing is we bring bodies home now. We don't leave them. We don't keep cemeteries in France. Imagine if we had built a cemetery at Bagram, a war memorial cemetery, and people had to deal with that grief of having the body overseas and unable to really, you know, see the family member's resting place. And that got me to thinking about all the Afghans and all, you know, foreign fighters or not, or whatever the case may be. I know there were people in Fallujah that weren't from Fallujah and probably have family members that don't know where their son is laid to rest, you know? And that's such a part of the grieving process. And I would just wonder how many graves we've filled in Afghanistan. You know what I mean? Yeah. And how many people know what became of their child or, you know, and I don't know, that it's not a complete thought, but it's just the tragedy is terrible on that side. And, you know, thinking about the interpreters lost that fought for our cause, the Afghan soldiers that fought on our behalf, because how many, 80,000 of them were killed? I don't know the number of. It's in the tens of thousands, far more than Americans killed. And not many people are going to be counting them up in the final count. You know, all of those are only a few of us that are really dedicated to thinking about this issue and remembering it are going to count that up as the cost. You know, Cost of War Project does a great job, but like you see it, I part of how I ended up where I am, and I think I've told this story before, is this sort of egalitarian streak in me that, you know, doesn't like when I see a single celebrity get 12 hours of news coverage when they pass away, but like a tsunami that kills 10,000 gets 30 seconds on the nightly news. You know, that kind of thing bugs me for some reason. I don't really know the root of it, but the fact that when those 13 Marines, those last 13 Marines tragically, and one sailor tragically were killed. I mean, does anybody have an idea what it's in the 80s? Maybe we don't really know a solid number of Afghans that were killed there, but all of a sudden, all of the wailing and gnashing of teeth over the plight of the Afghan people just faded immediately in the background. You know what I mean? For every person that Afghanistan was finally back on their radar for a hot second, and people were at least behaving as though or talking as though they cared about what would happen to the people in Afghanistan next, they immediately forgot about that when 13 Americans bled. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's not to say that those 13 Americans bleeding isn't a tragedy, because it is. You know what I mean? But if you ask the man on the street today, you know, they would only be able to tell you that those 13 Americans died and nothing about anything else, the 10,000 that have been wounded or killed every year for the last 7 years. Yeah. You know, just it's horrific. And I don't know how, I don't know exactly what we can do about it. I understand caring about people that are closer to you in some way that you can connect with. There's always that. You know, it's hard. Your heart can't bleed for every person in the world, you know, but at the same time, like it's seems perverse to like only seem to care, to do so much talk about caring, and then as soon as your team, you just lose all perspective again, you know?
It's that Stalin quote that where he said, "One death is a tragedy, and a million is just a statistic."
Yeah, that's true.
And we've kind of lived through that, and that was kind of what was going through my mind whenever Matthew was talking about he would walking through the cemetery, and he would see like somebody he had run across, because you always hear about how few American soldiers died, in statistically compared to how many Afghanis died or how many Taliban fighters died or whatever. And so when he's talking about running across, like we got a military of what, 3-4 million people or whatever it is in the United States, and you're talking about how often you ran across these names that you see at the cemetery, at Arlington Cemetery, that you recognize, and you're like, oh, I think I might have known that guy. And just, I'm thinking about all the other people that died and how many people actually knew those guys, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what's the percentage? Some crazy percentage, I can't remember, about a million, I think about 800,000 800,000 veterans from the Afghan War, about 1.5 million from the Iraq War, and a lot of the crossover where guys and gals served in both. And there's some, I think it's about 30 or 40,000 of the Afghan veterans were there more than 5 times.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing how often these men and women were recycled. I want to bring up the article that Scott was referencing is in the New Yorker by Anand Gopal, Gopal, called "The Other Afghan Women." Quite possibly the best thing you can read about Afghanistan in one sitting. And Anand's book, "No Good Men Among the Living," along with our friend Scott Horton's book, "Fool's Errand." Those are probably the 2 best books you could read about Afghanistan. If you're looking to understand the war, certainly from the American perspective about how stupid it was, Scott's book is amazing, and Anand's book gets more into the Afghan side, but "No Good Men Among the Living." But in this article in the New Yorker, Anand writes, again, it's titled "The Other Afghan Women." If you do not understand why so many Afghans are happy to see the United States out, why they may not be happy for the Taliban to be in power, but they're relieved that the current government is no longer in power, the Americans are gone, read this article by Anand Gopal. What he basically does is he sits with a woman who was born in 1980 in Helmand province in the south of Afghanistan and just goes through her life with her. And just the killings that occur. And at one point, he just lists her family members who have been killed by U.S. and British forces in the last 10 years. I mean, just, this cousin, this uncle got, and any one of those would make anybody fight against occupation, right? I mean, like, it is just the details, the explanation, but also to the emotion in that is just absolutely, it's a brilliant piece of work. I've known Anand for a number of years. His work is incredible. He's an incredibly brave journalist. He just gets in the taxi in Afghanistan and rides around, and that's why he's able to do this type of reporting. But to Scott's point, how often have you seen that level of concern, that level of detail directed for the people that we supposedly were liberating? It is so infrequent. And, as Scott said again, the loss of the 13 Marines and the sailor in that suicide bombing. And I think the numbers are about 150 Afghans dead or something like that from that suicide bombing. We'll never know. And right. The American media will never follow up. You'll never see a U.S. media report, CNN, Wall Street Journal, whatever, saying, hey, it definitely came out to 158 dead. No, it's gone. It's forgotten about.
Right.
And the numbers of these dead, just like the numbers of the Iraqis or in any of these other wars, they're baselines, they're minimum estimates. So when you hear that there's 70,000 Afghans dead in the last 20 years of war, like that is the bare minimum number. The way the United Nations works, the way groups like Air Wars works, other groups, is they use the most conservative methodology so that they cannot be criticized. And that's what you get. You get a baseline bare minimum number. Look, with Anand Gopal again in 2017 with another journalist who is just amazing, a woman named Azmat Khan, who has just done incredible work on both of these wars in terms of investigative reporting. They went to Mosul in 2017 after, the United States Air Force and Navy flattened Mosul, destroying Islamic State, and they destroyed not just Mosul, but pretty much every city in the Tigris and Euphrates valleys north and west of Baghdad, flattened them. What they found, Anand and Azmat found, was that, the U.S. numbers on how many civilians killed were off by at least a factor of 31. Of at least 31. And that's what they could ascertain from their reporting on the ground in a post-conflict, dangerous place. And if you talk to both Anand and Azmat about that factor of 31 number, it is bare minimum. I mean, it's a conservative. Their methodology was very strict. Nothing that they could not actually document, conclusively was included in their tallies. And even with that, it's a factor of 31 times what the U.S. military says are dead. And you see that. And I think when you're there and you experience it, another thing, you come home and just either you keep with the dissidents, you keep lying to yourself about it, or, I don't know about Scott, but I would bet that particularly my first time in Iraq and my time in Afghanistan, where I had a lot of purview, where I saw a lot, worked a lot with the Iraqis and the Afghans, and just from my position, I could see a lot what was going on. For every civilian casualty incident that occurred, that was reported, I bet there were 3 or 4 or 5 that were not, that just never, ever no one ever knows about. And that's something that Anand does. I mean, like, as he says in this piece, in this other Afghan women piece, almost none of the family members of this woman, Shakira, almost none of those family members made it into the totals that the United Nations says represent the dead in Afghanistan. So not only are these people victimized, they're brutalized, they're slaughtered, but their names, they're just erased. They're erased from history. It never happened.
And almost worse than that. I mean, and I doubt the people of Afghanistan lose any sleep over this. Well, who knows? The fact that, the Jack Murphy article that just came out that specifically mentions, a drone tracking a guy on a motorcycle, tracking him, and then they hit him at a crossroads, and they don't kill him, but they kill 2 other people that were at the crossroads. Yeah. And then they count, and then in their own count, they only count 1 enemy KIA. Well, so that was a civilian counted as an enemy. And how many, I don't know if the Afghans really concern themselves with who we label an enemy or not at this point. But it would gall me on some level to know that the Americans over there are sleeping soundly at night in the assurance that tonight our service members only killed 1 bad guy. Right. You know what I mean? But it wasn't the case. It was 2 civilians, and the bad guy got away. Even if he were, you know what I mean? Which I'm not willing to take for granted myself, But the idea that on some level to make a crude connection, but I think one that's been made before, and I think has some validity. It's the same as it's taken for granted as true that every person that the military killed that wasn't demonstrably proven to be a civilian was an enemy. You know what I mean? It's as if the police had carte blanche to shoot people and just say, well, he was a criminal, and no one questioned it. Like, imagine all of the killings like by police. Sometimes. Well, I mean, imagine all of the killings police here, but not a single person in this country. Imagine being the Black community here. And I know they felt like this. I know they have for a long time. But imagine it was the way it was 50, before that issue was brought to the forefront, the way it has been, where everyone just said, well, he was a criminal. You know what I mean? If the cop shot him, they must have had a good reason. End of story. You know what I mean? That wouldn't stand here. And it kind of, and it, I know there's a lot of people that I know there's a lot of people that would feel the same way if they gave it any thought. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of people that probably do feel the same way, but are focused on the issue at home first. You know what I mean? But there's a part of me that's like, God, I hope every person out here who's concerned about police brutality will consider the brutality that we've meted upon the rest of the world. You know what I mean? Because as it stands right now, there aren't at least in the media, the same media that might be willing to go along with, they're bad. They're not great, with the way they use their passive voice and whatnot. But the same media that's willing to support, to some extent, the protests against police brutality, not speaking up for the lives of the innocent people we've murdered and said we're criminals. There's some part about that's just galling, that we can just get away with saying, well, that the military could just get away with hand waving and saying, well, he was 18 to 25 and we didn't like the look of his face. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So he deserved it, and no one even bats, like, no one's going to die. No one's diving into that, or almost no one, It would drive me nuts if I was an Afghan. I know that.
And, and the thing is, Scott, remind me, when was your second deployment to Iraq?
2007. Or I got home in 07, 6-7.
Okay, so we were there at the same time. When I
was way out west in Rutba.
Were you? No shit.
Yeah.
Why did we talk about this? Not to get off, because I was with RCT 7 and RCT 2 the same time frame, like 06 to 07. But anyway, regardless, so both Scott and I were there in Iraq when the Sunni awakening happened, when the Sons of Iraq happened, when we literally saw going from, you couldn't leave your base, FOB, your FOB, your outpost, whatever you want to call it. You couldn't leave it without getting into something, without an IED attack, an RPG being shot at you, machine gun fire. Something was going to happen. It seemed like every time you left the base. And, in 06, you have this, basically the Americans, the Marines in Anbar, they strike a deal with the Sunnis out there. And we answer their grievances, and we put them kind of back in charge of their lands, of their people, of their cities, of their province. And overnight, it changes, right? Overnight, the violence drops. It was spooky. It was scary the way it dropped like that. And, so all of a sudden, these bad guys went from being bad guys to good guys in the span of a week. Right? Literally, even faster than, you hear the stories. You can read some great memoirs by guys who fought in the European front, in World War II, about I think Paul Fussell wrote about this, and some others, I can't recall their names right now, but they talk about their anger about having to push through, see their buddies killed, kill the Germans, and literally 3 or 4 weeks after the war is over, we've got to rearm the Germans because we have to now fight the Soviets. We got to fight the Russians. That type of anger. And we saw the same thing happen in Iraq, in 06, 07, where you're telling us we have to kill these people because they're bad. The insurgency is bad. It's evil. It's Al-Qaeda. It is terrorists, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, well, hang on. Now, that was a week ago. And now this week, literally, we are patrolling with these people. We are helping them man checkpoints. We are arming them. We are giving them money. So the fungible nature of who is bad, right, and who is good is just another absolutely obscene aspect of these wars. In the fact that, to Scott's point, we can kill these people and claim they are a military-age man, so they are bad, right? Or a week's change, and now they are good because they are on our side. It's just the obscenity of it is just it is just sickening and nauseating to have taken part in it, as well as to understand how it all works.
Yeah. You know what I'm thinking of here is I'm taking it down to to a ridiculous micro level, just in my own head as y'all are talking about this, just kind of like weighing and measuring. All right, if there were a person who were interacting with their neighbors in the way that the United States interacts with the world, if there were a person that was dire enemies with someone one minute and the next minute they were best friends, you would think this person is unstable. You wouldn't want anything to do with them. And yet we see the United States act in these erratic ways in foreign policy, and people defend them constantly. And it's like, you wouldn't do this in your personal life. You wouldn't defend a person that acted like this. Why is it? How is it so? How is it that you are capable of this cognitive dissonance in this situation? And that's really disturbing to me, because it shows the health of the state, the empire, whenever you see the way that they are interacting in these engagements.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting because, like I said to you guys earlier, I've been self-flagellating by listening to local talk radio, and they're processing this too, because they'll spend some time chatting about what's happening in Afghanistan, and to hear them blathering on about that we're supposed to trust the Taliban now have you heard Biden say that we're working with the Taliban now to get our people, we're going to work with them diplomatically, and none of them will bring up that Trump was actually inviting them to Camp David. Yeah, exactly. They just woke up yesterday, so it's reasonable to give. I wish they woke up a lot earlier. You know what I mean? But at least they're paying attention.
That's a hallmark of American foreign policy, is that history starts on a certain date. And so for Afghanistan, it doesn't even start on September 11th anymore. It starts on whenever Biden made the decision to pull the troops out.
Yeah, it is crazy. And related to that, it's like I'm turning into a middle-aged man when I'm listening to them too. Partially just as a natural process, but I think I'm accelerating it.
You bought a Porsche and started dating a 20-year-old? What?
Not quite, but just I'm wanting to scream at the radio, because they're like, the one thing is, you not recognize, you of course you make peace with your enemies. Who else do you make peace with?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, on the one level. Yeah. But then you're exactly right that we're so I don't know what goes on. But we're so quick to abandon our allies and embrace our enemies. And I wouldn't say we've embraced the Taliban with loving arms. That's not the case at all. But we're so quick to turn our backs on people that we've relied on for support through, whether it's the Kurds or the Hmong or the Montagnards. It seems like we abandon them almost thoughtlessly. In every war, there's always some group we relied on that we completely abandon at the end of it. I imagine during World War, I'm trying to think in World War II who we screwed over that helped us, but except maybe the Soviets. I wouldn't say we exactly screwed over, but we definitely turned on them.
You could look at, say, the Vietnamese. September 2nd was the anniversary of Ho. I just heard this the other day. That's why I know it. Literally just listened to a podcast today that talked about it. That's why I know this. But September 2nd, 1945, Ho Chi Minh reads his Declaration of Independence for Vietnam and models it completely off of the American Declaration of Independence. And what do? The same thing too with Korea. The people we put in charge of Korea, of South Korea, are the people who collaborated with the Japanese occupation. Yeah. So this idea, Scott, you're exactly right, man. Like, we just totally screw people over because it's easiest for us, I guess.
Yeah, I struggle to it seems a matter of ease because there's photographs of Ho Chi Minh with the OSS. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And there just must be an entire other world that happens within the OSS or the CIA on how they navigate that, you know? But to answer your question, as you were saying, Tommy, like the people, like if anyone casually who's paying the least bit of attention to American foreign policy, how could they ever ally themselves to us? You know, I think in part what we've done, and I'm sure some of the Afghans were savvy to this. They probably the people that were in Garoa, you know, that collaborated with us. If you, and I imagine the Kurds at this point, anyone who gets in bed with us is either stupid or is using us to get as far as they can, and knowing that we're, you know, and they're ready to pull their golden parrot. They're padding, whatever the term is for when they're building their little nest. They're building a safety net. They're buying themselves a parachute, whatever the analogy would be. But anybody who has any sense who works with us has to know that we're going to stab them in the back in a heartbeat.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so how can we prosecute a war if one wanted to? How could you prosecute a war with allies, with friends like us? You know what I mean? You know,
right.
With friends like us, who needs enemies? You know?
Yeah. It's just, I was just going to say, Dave Smith has this quote where he said, if you want to know who America's next enemy is going to be, look who they're financing today.
Huh.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, Scott, you know, if you can't try and answer your point to a degree, is the fact that our foreign policy is completely unprincipled. You know, I mean, there's no principles to define it. I mean, how can we be fighting the Taliban for women's rights and for democracy and, you know, those kinds of things, and we're selling hundreds of billions of dollars to the Saudis?
Right.
You know, right. I mean, like, look at I think the two best examples are our relationship with Colombia versus our relationship with Venezuela. You know, I mean, like, whatever one is a clear narco state, has been that way for decades, has death squads, et cetera, that we send them tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid every year. And Venezuela, which, you know, I'm not going to defend the Venezuelan government, but, you know, we've got them under the most brutal sanctions. You know, and what's the difference between the two countries? You know, there's no principle at all that defines us other than expediency and who is going to also go along with us. And I was going to say that there's a great show on Netflix. It's a Danish show called Borgen. It's about it's a terrific show. It's about this woman who kind of accidentally becomes prime minister. She kind of Forrest Gumps herself into becoming prime minister. But anyway, they deal with this a lot about dealing with the Americans, because the Americans just have so much resources, so much wealth, and there's always going to be people within these countries. And I've been in Europe and I've dealt with some of people on the leftist parties that want to break from the Americans and from NATO and other things and from the empire. But there are also a lot of people within those countries, political parties or whatnot, that see so much value in aligning themselves with the American empire because they get from it, right? They benefit as well. They're junior imperial partners in the grand, you know, in this grand experiment. So, excuse me, I think there's, you know, it comes down to the fact that we have a foreign policy that has got nothing to do with any form of principle. And then also, too, there are plenty of other people around the world who are happy to jump on our train because, hey, this gravy train, this is a pretty good gravy train. As I don't know if you ever remember Scott Guy saying in the Marine Corps, the gravy train with like biscuit wheels. You know, I mean, that's what it is. People want to be on it, you know?
I have, can I ask, this might take us in a different direction, but it's a thought we could put in a pin in it for another time. But can I ask, so the one argument that I've cooked up that discounts the blowback theory is Central America. Like blowback, like have we experienced blowback from our century and a half of wrecking and propping up dictators in Central America? Because that's the one thing I wonder about sometimes with blowback as a theory makes a lot of sense to me, but I see this huge gaping hole with why aren't we scared to death of all the and I welcome the people that are coming here from Salvador and Guatemala, but why aren't we every bit as scared of the Salvadorans and Guatemalans that come here as we are of people from the Middle East? If we hold the theory, and I'm not saying I'm afraid, but why aren't we not seeing terrorism from those countries if blowback holds as a theory? Because God knows the CIA has done a number and runs it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If anybody should be paying us back, it's people in Central America. Yeah.
Well, I would just, my only, rebuttal to that would be like MS-13 and the cartels and the violence that's carried out on the border, and the way that MS-13 interacts in the cities. Mm-hmm. And the only reason I know anything about that is I know, I knew a kid years ago, probably in like 2006, 2007, who was former MS-13, and he fled to the United States, and he was constantly afraid that these guys were going to come to the United States after him. And because they do act in the United States, United States, and they are a brutal gang. But you're right. There's not
directed at like the people of America as a terrorist threat. And that's I'm sorry, that was just an extra thing. It just got my gears turning when you were mentioning Central and South America, and how we have been really messing with those countries. Like you said, you were mentioning just the lack of principle and who we ally ourselves to. And I just was listening to a discussion of the movie Salvador by Oliver Stone, and I had watched it about a year or so ago. And it really is, it's just disgusting what we've done there.
Oh, yeah. Read Confessions.
This is really taking us off topic. So, but
read Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yeah.
That John Perkins book is just phenomenal. And
that was one of the books that, in terms of like I don't want to say my awakening, but where really I read that book before I deployed to Iraq my second time. And, it took me years to dissent, years to stop being involved with it. I regret that. I'm ashamed of that. But I remember reading that Perkins book in the summer of 2006. And that was, that moved things within me, and who knows how I don't know the veracity of the book, or, a lot of people claim it's completely false or fabrication, but I've also been around enough and seen enough to know. Look, I did in 2010, the Dutch brought me over. So in around 2009, 2010, I can't really remember the exact time frame. The Dutch government, the conservative Dutch government falls, and a liberal Dutch government comes in. I don't think you call them leftists. I think they're probably more centrist. But anyway, they're getting out of Afghanistan. The Dutch are getting out of Afghanistan. And there's a lot of controversy, discussion in the country about that. The Dutch intelligence agency, the Dutch intelligence service, brought me over a number of times to speak to their people about Afghanistan, to meet with members of their parliament, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, long way of saying that I was told by senior Dutch people that when the Dutch went to go out of Afghanistan, and the Dutch eventually go back into Afghanistan, they jump back into the quicksand. One of the threats that they had was that the Americans had told them, we will pull our shipping from Rotterdam if you don't go back into to Afghanistan. Like that type of, just the same type of thing Perkins was talking about. And you're not talking about, Perkins was talking about, developing economies, right? Poor nations. Right. Here you're talking about what once was itself an empire. This is how the United States is shaking it down to take part in this war in Afghanistan, upset because the Dutch pulled their troops out of Uruzgan province. Right, we're going to stop American shipping to Rotterdam because of that. So those things do happen, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of the things you were talking about armor and the technology that the United States has introduced and how it saves so many lives. And y'all were both involved in the military at the time that there was that whole shakeup with the MRAPs, and they were withholding the MRAPs and continuing to use Humvees because they had a relationship or a contract with Stewart and Stevenson, so they were going to continue to use Humvees. And a whistleblower came out and blew the whistle saying, hey, so many lives would be saved if we were using the MRAPs. And I mean, this is just one of several scandals that have come to fruition and come out into the public eye from Afghanistan and Iraq and the time in the Middle East in general. What were y'all directly involved in any way and see any of the repercussions that formed around that entire argument between the Humvees and the MRAPs before the MRAPs were introduced properly into the United States military?
Well, I mean, I can't really, just as a sort of table laying to go along with that, I guess I could say, it was amazing to see from, when I first got to Iraq in 2004 to 2012, that 8 years, the sea change. I mean, my first Humvee that we got, and our flak jackets were basically the old style, like a Kevlar police vest overlapping and a plate. You know what I mean? That was it. Nothing on the side, relatively slick. And our Humvee was a stake bed, flatbed truck with boilerplate slapped on the side. After we saw our first IED strike, stripped out all the seats, sandbag, put Kevlar blast blankets down. We made the armor ourselves. You know what I mean? To the extent there was any. We still had L doors, just a 3/4 door. Right. You know what I mean? And then, we got our first up armored Humvee that wasn't armored on the bottom, but it had side doors and couldn't drive up a hill because it was too heavy. And then my next deployment, they had this crazy up armor that couldn't even move the thing you couldn't drive it. And my second deployment, just that's 2006, 2007, they had upgraded the armor to, you had I don't know if they had changed the vest itself, but my best friend had I got to find the picture of it, but they had him in Kevlar pants with full Kevlar sleeves and a Kevlar hoodie. We weren't allowed to leave the base without flight suits on at the time because that was the only fire retardant. They were worried about flame enhanced, or people got worried about burns. So but they didn't have what developed later on, what they called frog gear. We'll get there in a second, but they had us in flight suits. And if you were in the turret, you had to have a full neck coverage. He had sleeves and Kevlar pants. It couldn't even walk when he got out. He looked like the kid from Kid Ralphie from
Christmas Story.
You know what I mean? You had this weird seatbelt / harness that held you into the turret, which was great for hanging somebody upside down with. If you wanted to prank them, you could just hoist them up with that thing. And then by 2009, they've got camouflage uniforms that are fire retardant. Now they have the MTV, the modernized vest that has clips on the shoulder and can release quickly, and you don't leave without an MRAP. The only vehicle you were allowed to leave base. It went from driving in bucket trucks to Humvees only to MRAPs only in the course of 5 years. But even then, I took a particular interest in this because I think my interest preceded the Rolling Stone article about castrations. But for whatever reason, I read The Sun Also Rises right before my last deployment. And then the Rolling Stone and I went out and bought a Kevlar diaper, You know what I mean? And then that Rolling Stone article, and everyone had been kind of worried about, you had been hearing stories about people getting castrated by IEDs. And by the time that Rolling Stone article about, about people, making arrangements with their corpsmen to just put them down if they're castrated, makes the Rolling Stone, all of a sudden every unit gets a box of diapers the next day. You know what I mean? Yeah. Share them, whatever you have to do. Everyone wears a diaper. As soon as they get bad press, they just crap out. And the same with the flak jackets and all that other stuff. It was always driven by bad press. And then the stuff miracled itself there. It's like it had been sitting there the whole time. Yeah. You know what I mean? Literally the next day after that Rolling Stone article, they're like, nobody leaves with, I don't care if you have to share these 13 diapers, no one in the platoon leaves without them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Until everyone had one within a month, and meanwhile, 6 months earlier, I was trying to buy one and, had to, you couldn't get one, you know what I mean? So, all that's to say with the MRAP thing, I don't remember the particulars of that one, but it comes down to like there's enough money and there's enough willing military contractors to crank out whatever garbage the military wants to buy. The next day, it's driven by outrage more than anything else, and people and getting people to pay attention for a second, and all of a sudden, the military just the things materialize.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, God, that brought back so many memories, Scott. When I got to Iraq my first time, May of 2004, same thing too. I was in a Humvee that had the L-shaped door. So basically my shoulders up were exposed, and I had a pin and there was a hammer that was kept next to my door that I would use to drive a pin through kind of like this jury rig latch to keep the door closed, right? And the door weighed probably 400 pounds, but again, it only covered my shoulders down below. So maybe that would have been okay, but the rest of my body, my shoulder, the stuff I really care about.
What do you need from the neck up? Honestly?
Anything from the neck up. Yeah. I mean, but it was like that, I remember the body armor that particularly the Army that we worked with over in Iraq was starting to wear. There's one cap that I worked with all the time. He had this big heavy truck unit, and he shows up one time and he looks like Batman. I mean, he's got all this stuff, all this Kevlar. He can barely walk, just like Ralphie in the Christmas Story. But, I remember the same thing, all the stuff you're saying, the way it shows up, just like it just had been sitting someplace waiting for it to pop up. But also, too, the way it was delivered without any thought about maintaining it or keeping it or teaching us how to use it. I remember it must have been about, I don't know, June or July of 2004 when I saw my first up-armored Humvee. And my buddy John Lawler, he had it. For whatever reason, he had gotten one, and we're driving from Tikrit up to Beji, which is about 25 kilometers, probably, maybe more. I don't know. Anyway, his vehicle blows a tire, probably because they had the same exact tires on this vehicle that now had all this armor on it that they did before. A lot of that kind of stuff happened. And the point being was that we broke two jacks trying to lift this thing before someone realized, wait, hey, hang on, maybe the jacks we're trying to use aren't meant to lift up this armored Humvee. So we had to stop an Iraqi truck by gunpoint, take that terrified guy's jack. You use that to lift up, and who knows who was watching us, whatever happened to that trucker, all that kind of stuff. It was just one folly after another, and it wasn't just the vehicles, it was anything. In 06, 07, particularly in fall of 06, in the area we were in, what was called the Triad. So Haditha, Haqqaniya, Barwana, extending down to Heat and some other places. The Iraqis had some really good snipers, and they were really effective, and they were killing a Marine or a sailor or a soldier almost every day in guard towers, putting rounds through, from 1,000 yards away, right underneath the lip of a guy's helmet type of thing. That's how accurate these guys were. They were very well trained. They were good. And I was the combat engineer officer for the regiment, and that was my job, was to make sure that these guys in these towers, among other things, had the right type of protection. And we could not get bulletproof glass. We couldn't. It was impossible. What my Marines had to do was they had to go to the Dermo lot on El Asad Air Base, which is Dermo is I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but basically it's where the military sends all their used stuff, right? So like you get a vehicle it's gone past its mileage, you've got a computer that doesn't work anymore, you've got a desk that only has 3 legs, you send it to Dermo, right? And so my guys used to have to go down, my company gunny would go to the Dermo lot, find Humvees that had been blown up, take the bulletproof glass out of the Humvees, and then my Marines would rig it up so that we could use that in guard towers, because the wealthiest nation in the world could not provide bulletproof glass for Marines and soldiers who were standing post and getting shot in the head by Iraqi snipers. It was you just saw that over and over again. The MRAP situation, the thing you were talking about, Tommy, that goes back to a guy named Franz Gale, and I know Franz, and you want to talk about people who are patriots. I don't use that word. I rarely use that word. I've used it now for a few different people, but Franz Gale is one of them I will use it for. And Franz Gale had been a Marine officer, then he had transitioned to become basically a Department of Defense civilian who was involved in procurement. And around 2005, 2006, as these MRAPs are becoming available, he realizes that the Marine Corps leadership is not purchasing these MRAPs because it would screw up the Marine Corps' plans for the future. That by buying these MRAPs, it would take away money from the other high budget priorities of the Marine Corps, like the F-35 and something like that. Central to this was Jim Mattis, who I despise, but he's got this cult of personality around him. But that was one of the things that Mattis was involved in, was didn't want the MRAP because it would cost too much and it would inflict harm on the rest of the Marine Corps' budget. And those are the kinds of things that occurred. They hounded Franz. They tried to put him in jail. They threatened him with all kinds of Espionage Act type of things, and that's what they did. Rather than taking care of the guy who stood up for Marines and sailors in Iraq who were getting killed every day by these IEDs, they went after him because he was ruining their big budget plans. I mean, and I can go on and on. I mean, so much what Scott brought up, the flight suits, all this different stuff. I mean, like you have to look at this and you have to say, because I remember at one point hearing the president talk about this, President Bush being asked about Humvees and MRAPs and other things and taking care, have the guys in Iraq having the right things that they needed. And President Bush saying something along the lines of, well, the factories are making them as quickly as possible. And nobody's saying, how about you build a second fucking factory? That's part of it, right? I mean, like, right. The war worked the way the corporations wanted it to work. The war worked the way the Pentagon wanted it to work. And like as Scott said, the only time things showed up is when somebody made a stink about it, when somebody got embarrassed about it. And I totally see what Scott's talking about with those Kevlar diapers where, 6 months later, after he's had to buy one off of eBay or something like that, they show up, just truckloads of them. It really, the idea that somehow the military leadership, politicians, civilian authority, whatever, cares about the young men and women that are over there, it's just nonsense.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask
go ahead, man.
Do you know that? So the MRAP thing too, was that also not held up? You mentioned Mattis, and I'm recalling now there was a project with the Osprey coming online around that time, and they wanted that 120 millimeter mortar so bad because God knows you need that extra 40 millimeters of just to make yourself feel like a real man.
And it's gone now. The 120 millimeter mortar is gone. It lasted all of 10 years. Yeah.
And not only that, but it came as part of a package with this. Somebody cooked up this idea where it's going to be great. We're going to put the mortar in the back of an Osprey, and then it's towed. So we need a vehicle that can tow it. Nothing we have in the inventory will do it. So they came up with this dune buggy Jeep type thing that was supposed to, the Growler, I think they called it. And then, of course, this is this is in 2006, 2007, when everyone's screaming for up armors, and the Marine Corps is busy trying to buy these dune buggies to tow their mortar around with, because it's the only thing that'll fit in the tiny little Osprey that they're also pissing away money on. And the price of them was something absurd too. And I don't remember I don't know if they directly tied to each other, but I just remember being like, I remember seeing that they were buying this dune buggy thing at the time when everyone just need armor. Armor is what we need. And you're buying something, this nonce that you can fit and make within the weight limits of a Osprey, which is pathetic, because God, just got sold a bill of goods and it was just a really good example of like, where are your priorities right now? It's just, you came up with this program and you're so dedicated to this program that you don't give a damn about the war that's happening right in front of you. You know what I mean? And
I was going to say, it reminds me, one, about how smart the leadership thinks they are, and they have some kind of crystal ball and they can predict what's going to happen, and they're wrong. I mean, when I was a second lieutenant, going through all my basic training in the Marine Corps and going through the basic school and all that kind of thing, I mean, the number of colonels and generals who stood in front of like these brand new officers talking about the littorals, how the Marine Corps is dedicated to fighting in the littorals. X% of the world's population lives within 100 miles of the ocean, et cetera, et cetera. And then the Marine Corps ends up in two massive land wars in basically countries that are landlocked. I mean, Iraq is not landlocked, but it might as well be, particularly if you're in Anbar province. I mean, like, and I remember being a second lieutenant going through combat engineer school, and they had this big combat engineer conference. And combat engineers are, if people don't know, combat engineers are responsible for finding and dealing with landmines and IEDs and roadside bombs and stuff like that. And they had, this was 1998, 1999. Anyway, they had these vehicles there. It was a big deal. People came from all around the world from it. And big deal. And they had these funny looking vehicles with these V-shaped holes, right? Which were MRAPs, mine resistant ambush protected vehicles. And they came from South Africa. And I remember this colonel who was very wise, and we all listened to him. And he said, "Oh, these are great vehicles, but makes no sense for the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps will never be in a war where it's dealing with occupation, where it's dealing with guerrilla warfare, where it's dealing with landmines, right? I mean, the same thing you'd hear about how the Marine Corps will never fight. You'd hear these guys talking about how Hue, the Battle of Hue in Vietnam, which was a terrible urban battle, and that's the battle. If everyone's familiar with Full Metal Jacket, that's the end scene takes place in Hue. But Hue, the United States Marine Corps is never going to do another battle like Hue. And then, Scott and his guys end up in Fallujah, not many years after that, as well as all kinds of other conflicts. I mean, so just like the slavishness to their own ideology, to their own doctrine. And what you would see was like this idea, like Scott said, about how we're going to have this vehicle that's got a 120 millimeter mortar. It's towing a 120 millimeter mortar. It fits in the back of the Osprey. The Osprey fits on the ship. It all works together. Like they push that. They push that. Their good idea becomes a reality. And what you saw, and I was in the Secretary of Navy's office in the first part of these wars from 2002 to 2004. I saw this play out with the Marine Corps, where forget about Afghanistan, forget about the fact we just invaded Iraq. We are still pushing forward with our ship-to-shore maneuver doctrine, right? Which involves the AAAV, which is the Advanced Amphibian Assault Vehicle, which was an incredible boondoggle. They wanted basically a tank that could fight on land, survive anything on land, and also go about 35 knots an hour. So just think about that, right? Just think about what they wanted to do, right?
I remember the commercials.
Yeah, right. And then you have like the Osprey, and then you have these like new littoral combat ships, and all these things that just don't, first of all, probably won't work, but on the other, just don't apply to the actual wars that we're in. But these colonels and generals are so wedded to their ideas and to their fantasies that this is how it takes us years to get MRAPs in Iraq. This is how it takes years for guys like Scott to get Kevlar diapers and the actual body armor that they need, because this war may end next year. No sense really sinking any of the money that we have budgeted for our F-35s, for our, for our AAAVs, for our 120 millimeter mortars, et cetera, et cetera.
And when I was stationed at Quantico, we had to pull duty at McCittick periodically, which is the Marine Corps Combat Development Command, which is where there's a couple of stars in there and a army of civilians cooking up all of these wild ideas for these different programs. There's the air development. They've got the different aircraft they're looking at procuring, and so you have a 24-hour duty where you're at the desk, or one guy's at the desk, and then there's a cleaning crew that comes in at night, and you have to escort them from floor to floor and just kind of follow them around and make sure they're not, making just copies of anything. And I'm just sitting there like looking at all the next whiz bangs, and you could see that each of these is, every desk was probably a colonel, lieutenant colonel who retired, who moved on to being a DoD civilian, and has dedicated the last, the twilight of his career, the last 10 to 20 years, to making their little project work and getting the Marine Corps to buy it and fund it the way they think it deserves to be. And these desks, where they have this shrine to creating a ship that looks like an oil tanker, that you can, instead of having the traditional ship with a well deck where the boats can come in and on and off the back of it, you can sink the whole thing down and have your amphibious vehicles kind of onload and offload more quickly from the side, instead of having to share the one little berthing in the back. And just looking at it, like, this is never going to go anywhere, for no other reason than no one's going to find this oil tanker amphibious vehicle to be sexy enough. Just look at it. You know what I mean? That doesn't have a big gun on it. Who's going to buy that? You know what I mean? And I don't know if you've ever seen the Pentagon Wars, but walking around that office was just like seeing 1,000 little people's Pentagon Wars. If you've ever seen that movie, it's worth a watch. It's funny, and it goes through the development of the Bradley. So this is on the Army side, but it's worth watching because it's entertaining and it's evergreen with the story. But yeah, and then we're kind of, I think I'm not to beat a dead horse, but I just remember when things come out like the fire retardant gear. Every Marine is getting in trouble because they've been so hastily produced that the inseam doesn't hold, and every Marine has their entire crotch showing because the inseam of the fire retardant camouflage pants was just worthless. So every Marine there has their junk hanging out, and they're like, "This is the only pair I've got. I got issued 2 pairs. Both of them had the inseam out," and then they're getting screamed at by somebody for having their goods on display on patrol. I
did a year with the Joint I-80 Defeat Organization, so it's called JIDO. Yeah, and my job there was I actually led a team that was trying to find technologies that could defeat suicide bombers. And we did all kinds of tests. We tested probably 25 different pieces of technology, the different equipment. We went up to Massachusetts. We had guys up there, civilian engineers up at the Air Force lab up in Massachusetts that did the testing for us. I mean, really just professionally done. And what we found was that after, the better part of a year trying to find things to stop suicide bombers, nothing worked better than the standard X-ray machine that you have in every courthouse in America. And I remember the vice director at JIDO, whose name escapes me at the time, escapes me right now. He said to me, he's like, "Look, no one is going to believe your report. No one wants to see this because what you are recommending is people buy things that cost $3,000 rather than $300,000 or $3 million. It's just not how we do things." And that was very, very, very.
Nothing comes off. That's the thing. Nothing comes off the shelf. If it's already developed, it's not worth working on. So that's where MRAPs existed. They had them in South Africa already. That's already on the shelf. Who wants to waste any time buying that? who can build a career off of just being like, hey, look, there's that thing that looks like it'll do the job. Let's buy it. You know?
So you're telling me it never crossed his mind just to raise the price? If the cost is what the problem is, just increase the price, and now everybody believes it works. Relabel it, call it something else. Like
the other thing that actually did work were the detectors that we have all through the airports, the ones that are the imaging detectors that you can really see everything. You can
the pervert detectors.
Exactly. Those things. We actually ran into a problem. I don't think we realized, our testers didn't realize how graphic the depiction was of the person going through. And we had, we up at that air base, we had a bunch of airmen, both men and women, acting as testers for us, running through these machines for us. And, we had a bunch of women go through, and sure enough, the photo of them that comes through is pretty detailed. So the argument against those machines about how they are invasion of privacy is certainly there, but they also worked as well. And those cost a lot of money, but, they would also be within a day, being outdoors, they would stop working. They're such high maintenance things.
Well, we get into that, and then we can just talk about how the NSA has failed, or TSA has failed 98% of every test that has ever been run, because they hire people that don't know how to do a damn thing. They're going to McDonald's and hiring burger flippers to come in and be some sort of authority that they have no business.
Not to go too far off, our stated topic, but
we're going to get back to it.
That ship has sailed.
I know how to get us back on track.
Okay, but when I was doing that work, when I was leading that team, I worked with TSA, with Homeland Security, with other folks, and what I learned, what they told me, was that the reason at that point they liked those machines was because they could confiscate a lot of money. And that's what those machines probably did. They confiscated a lot of money. People trying to board airplanes with money taped to their legs or around their stomach or whatever, and of course that's seizure, right? I mean, the government, right? The agency's allowed to keep that money. So that was a boon for TSA. Homeland Security was, now I'm not sure how many people actually try and run through those machines with cash strapped to them, but at least, back in 07, 08, 09, people were still attempting to do that.
Yeah. No. Well, but this goes back to what I was saying a while ago. I mean, the mental health of an individual is shown by how that individual interacts with the world around them, right? So when a nation is interacting with its own citizens in this way, that's just a microcosm of what it's doing in the rest of the world. Like the authoritarian ideal of America today would not have sat well with anybody from the 50s or 60s, right? And so if you look at the way that the United States treats its own citizens, it's no surprise that it treats the rest of the world the way it does.
One of the reasons that, and this is maybe you could call it one of the more selfish reasons that I'm anti-war, but one of the things that got me that I find compelling is that everything we do. I was talking to a woman this weekend who's a vegetarian, and she reminded me of this because she was talking, and we weren't having a discussion about vegetarianism, but she mentioned that one of the reasons she is that everything we do to animals, we eventually do to humans.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm.
And I found that to be really compelling, and that might have been you could call it selfish that got to me, like, oh yeah, that could be coming our way too, but one of the reasons I'm anti-war was I found the argument very compelling that everything we do we have this, we have American exceptionalism in the sense that it's only okay to experiment on these things on other people, generally, and then it comes home and gets normalized. So the thing that all of the national security state gets pilot tested, everything, every major abuse, whether it was prohibition or the drug war, a lot of those things get pilot tested on the military first, or in other countries and on the military. It goes on that gradation. It's like, we'll do it to the people overseas, we'll do it to the people in the military, and then we're doing it at home. Yep. You know what I mean? And that step towards pilot, whether you want to call it pilot testing or normalization, the things that we do, American exceptionalism is a real phenomena that we harbor, but at the same time, we seem to think in spite of all the evidence, we seem to think we're the exception to the rule, that it'll come home to haunt us. So we end up with all the, you know what I mean?
Chickens always come home to roost.
And nobody, it's just crazy that, when you're talking about the sort of warfare state doing those things to people abroad, spying on them, drones, I wish I was joking. I don't think people, get really excited when they hear about the AGM 114N, the flying Ginsu knife, the one that has the blades. They get really excited about that. I don't know why everyone does. I guess I did too. I was curious as soon as I heard about it. They were experimenting with how do we have, when we just put a piece of iron in there, it bounces around and kills people. So we got to do something lighter that'll still kill people. So let's put some blades on it, right?
Right.
I wish I was joking, but I don't think it'll be that. I think in my lifetime, you'll see a car chase or something, some baddie in America hit with one of those.
Yeah.
I honestly think it'll happen. People I've heard people, if they were under a rock before, because we've been using those things for a while, when they heard about the airstrike in Afghanistan, the retaliatory strike, people were paying attention to the war on terror for 1 second. And this is the first time I know people that I work with, in my hallway, they're like, oh, that's pretty damn cool, and it, it seems to have done the job, and I could see them just thinking, when next time there's a hostage situation somewhere that captivates the television for 2 hours of a news cycle, somebody just screaming, well, why don't we just put an AGM 114N through the window? Right. You know what I mean?
Well, they did that, Scott, not with a flying drone, but remember you had that shooter in Dallas in 2015, 2016, who killed, a bunch of cops. I'm sympathetic to the police in this situation. A guy shot and killed 5 or 6 police officers in Dallas, but they killed him with a robot. They drove a robot up to him and detonated like a stick of C4. So it has happened, not as dramatically or as in the manner that we're killing people in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Mali, Somalia, etc. But yeah, it's on the way. And certainly if you look at some of these technologies that are out there, they've got this, it's called a flying hand grenade. It's about as big as, like, if anyone has an eyeglass case or a sunglass case, it's about the same size as that, with like a little helicopter rotor on top of it. It can fly about 10 kilometers. And these things have the ability to use facial recognition. They are in use overseas. How long until somebody knows that, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is giving a speech at Central Park, or Donald Trump is giving a speech at, outside of Mar-a-Lago, and just, from 5 miles away, throws this thing in the direction of where these people are speaking, and this thing hunts out and kills somebody. I mean, that technology is here now. I mean, a year and a half ago, a drone in Libya did an autonomous kill mission where it found the person it was looking for without the use of human help and killed that person. We have rifles now because of the drones, because of and it all cycles on itself, right? That's the tech. The feedback loop on this. So you have the drones, so you need something to defeat the drones. Well, we have these rifles now, these rifle sights that are basically the sight in the rifle is one weapon. And you aim the rifle, at what you want to shoot. You know, the rifle acknowledges the target, and then you pull the trigger and you hold the trigger down, and the weapon does not fire until the sight has, the computerized sight has determined that you will actually hit that target. And you can purchase this thing for $6,000. You can go on YouTube and find advertisements for them. I mean, so to your point, exactly, Scott and Tommy, how long until this comes home, not just with the surveillance and the loss of privacy and the indefinite detention and the militarized police, all those things, but until people start using this form of warfare, these weapons here. Certainly the rhetoric is there. I mean, it's just a matter of time before the rhetoric equals action.
Right. Well, I mean, just think about, and you can look in history, and you look at, Waco, or you look at the Black Wall Street, or the neighborhood in Philadelphia.
The move bombing. Yeah.
Yeah. Or what was it? The military veterans, the strike after World War II, that wanted their
battle.
Their
no, not Blair Mountain. Blair Mountain's different, isn't it?
Oh, you mean the bonus march after World War I? The bonus
march. Thank you.
After World War I.
Yeah. And so
General MacArthur led the. General MacArthur was the one who put them down.
Right. So you look at these scenarios and you're like, well, I mean, there's no lack of willingness to kill your own people. It's there, So, you can absolutely imagine everything that's happened in Afghanistan happening here. And for people that can't imagine that, I don't know, that maybe they're just historically ignorant on these subjects, and they don't understand that the United States has gone out and assaulted and murdered their own people in these ways,
Well, also too, it's not that far. I have friends who are from the former Yugoslavia, right? Who are from, different Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia, et cetera, that, they will tell you that they never thought it could happen there. These are people my age, right? So right. Late 40s, early 50s, who were, well into their lives by the time the mid-90s come and these wars come, and, never thought it could happen there. And it certainly did, right. Terrible warfare. Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to get us back on Afghanistan, because I want to close with kind of what y'all's ideas are of what you're seeing now that we're pulling out, and all of the tragedy that's happening there. We see people hanging from planes, and I know we've kind of touched on this to an extent, but I think Scott Horton in Fool's Errand said that, look, it doesn't, we got to get out now, because it doesn't matter what we do, it's going to be ugly, right? Did it have to be as ugly as it is?
Go ahead, Scott.
I imagine it could have been. It's tough. I don't think it could have been much better. I think it could have been better, but not by much. Okay. It's not exactly a wolf by the ears situation, but the fact is, as soon as you show no confidence in the Afghan government, it will collapse around you. So you can't all this. It's not great that we've left. You couldn't take, and they would not have let you. I don't think the Afghan military. Well, who knows? Strangely enough, I don't think the ANA would have willingly given up their armored vehicles and whatnot to us if we had demanded it back from them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just being honest, you know what I mean? So what were our choices? We've given them Humvees and MRAPs and this, that, and the other for years now. We're going to say, you know what? We're tired. We're done with you. Give it back. I think they would have been like, screw you at that point, regardless. So it's not like we could have taken all these people that are worried about when we left all this military equipment there. It's like, it was always going to be left there. There's no way, there's no way you were like, either it was going to fall into the hands that fell into. As soon as it got there, it was gone for all intents and purposes. And then So that doesn't bother me at all. The people that are about, I mean, I get the jokes about I wish the government would give me an MRAP or whatever, you know, but
you don't want one.
but yeah, but yeah, the point being that doesn't, like, the stuff left behind, the people of Afghanistan that want to get, that's another part too. I mean, let's say you did want Afghanistan to survive and thrive after this. Well, you know, you can't. As soon as I call it. I borrowed a term. I don't think it was meant to. It was. They were discussing the U.S. invasion of Mexico and how Mexican Americans are part of our country as part of the Harvest of Empire. There's a documentary called The Harvest of Empire, and I took that, kind of expanded on it, and I think I'm the only one really hawking it around. But you know, the fact of the matter is, anytime we intervene militarily somewhere, if for the anti-immigration, right-wing, pro-war crowd, to the extent they exist, you're kidding yourself if you don't you need to recognize that you can't be both. You can't be pro-war and anti-immigration, because you're going to get a huge immigrant population from whatever country we go to war with.
Creating the immigrants. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you're going, if you win the war, you're going to create like a two-way path for all of the elites of that country to come here, because we're an imperial power and we're the imperial center, and we're going to draw in the people and train them here, just like we drew in Afghan officers and trained them here. We brought in people, we brought them to medical school, and they created connections and set some roots here. You know what I mean? And then they go back to their home country. But if the government if we succeed in that nation building, we're going to have an open trading relationship, and there's going to be a diaspora, a movement of people. And if we fail in the endeavor, then there's always this correct feeling of obligation to take pity on those people and let them come here, because we raised their hopes and left them out to dry. So you can't be conservative. You can't be pro-war and anti-immigration at the same time, unless you are just of two minds. So that's to say, but at the same time, for those people who wanted it to look pretty, well, you know, we created this war, and if we were going to leave, there was going to be a brain drain, because all of those people that we brought into the Kabul bubble and created, you know, Kabul University and the American University in Kabul, and made this elite, you know, group that's close to the Afghan government that also has close ties with the United States. Well, they're not going to stick around for when the Taliban comes to town. And you know what I mean? They're going, so all the brain power of the country, there's just a massive brain drain that you set up. And that's a story of colonialism everywhere, you know, that there's always this brain drain effect. And that's to say that, so if we're going to withdraw, well, I mean, to do it, and withdrawal is always tricky, but to do it in such a way that the pivot points of the people in power and people in positions that you need stay for as long as you need them to stay, somebody's gonna have to stick their neck out and say, well, look, we're gonna hold the line here and then we're gonna get everybody out we can. But it was never gonna happen, because as soon as you expressed no confidence in the Afghan government was going to fold and everyone was gonna get out as fast as they could. You know what I mean? So in order to do it, you either had to slip out in the middle of the night. I mean, we could talk about whether keeping Bagram open would have been better, or maybe some remote, like the Rhino airfield or Delaram, some remote desert airfield where you could helicopter people to there, and then, you know, someplace in the middle of the desert, because there's a handful of airfields that are in the middle of nowhere desert that really wouldn't be at risk, let's say, the way Bagram or might have been at risk from attack from the surrounding mountains, you know, or crowds of people. Maybe you could have helicoptered people out of Kabul and then to a runway where there wouldn't be that scene of people falling off the aircraft, because it would have been a controlled site. There are probably a handful of things that could have been done differently or better. But the difference, I think, would have been marginal. And ultimately, what I also would say is, you know, to some of the people I work with that are more like Trump worshipers, I mean, these same people, if would have not taken a word of the media's hawkish bullshit propaganda seriously, if Trump were president right now during the withdrawal, they would have said every single time the media played the video of people falling off the aircraft or anything, they're just like, that's only 3 people. The media is just bullshit and spinning it up and no, and they would have defended Trump to the death as he withdrew.
Right.
You know what I mean? But with Biden in office, they've just played patsies. They rolled right over, succumbed to stupid partisanship, and leapt on Biden and believed every piece of crap the Warhawk media fed them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's probably the most disappointing thing is like the backsliding. I mean, there's a lot of disappointing things, but one of the major disappointments to me is the backslide. There had been this progress with creating, with all the warts and all, they're not perfect, but creating something of an anti-war skeptical right just evaporated with this, I think. And as soon as they lost their minds, they lost their skepticism when it comes to this. And when the next time, as soon as the media plays up the next terrorist attack that does happen, the media will blame it all on the withdrawal, and the right that we just started making some progress with will leap to it and say this is why we can never leave another war ever. I'm really afraid of that. I could be wrong, but like big picture, I think that's probably the long-term worst effect is that I think this actually might have done harm to the anti-war cause. And last thought, the other bad part is everyone thinks all the wars are over now. Yeah. As far as they know, Somalia is not happening. Yemen. As far as they know, Libya is not still going on. None of that's going to be talked about. We only got 5 minutes of Afghanistan on the news for the last 2 years, and none on those countries. So as far as everyone else is concerned, we're out of all the wars now, and hopefully the End the Damn Wars rally on this weekend can draw some attention to that, and we can keep things up. But I'm afraid that it might have set us back strangely.
Shout out to Magnus.
A Pyrrhic victory. Yeah.
That was all his conception.
Yeah. He was worried that because it's on the eve of the end of the war that it would be bad, but it's like I think this is the time. It's the time to try to keep I'm glad it's actually happening after we're out of Afghanistan. The Damn Wars rally is happening after we're out of Afghanistan, because if it just highlights to anyone that there's still stuff going on, and this is all the more reason to be vigilant against the next war.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To end the wars that are left and be against the next one, because God knows, I'm afraid we didn't learn our lesson.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we got the End the Damn Wars rally, and then October 4th, we have Scott Horton debating Bill Kristol. So that's happening too. So that's a positive.
Maybe I'm feeling a bit in a down mood today. Sorry, but I think
it's not been the happiest conversation.
Yeah, I kind of woke up. I said earlier this morning, I woke up and felt like I just for a variety of reasons felt like I just swallowed a whole bottle of black pills.
Yeah,
but
that happens to all of us.
But I think we could still keep grinding, and there's, as long as we keep at it, we can make some difference.
Got to.
Sorry. I yield my time.
Yeah. All right, Matthew. Like, how are you looking at all this? Like this pulling out and all the horrible images that are being spread around. Like, I know you've been for leaving this war for quite a while, and not saying Scott hasn't, but I know you have, and I've read a lot of your articles on the subject. And so, is this worse than you thought it was going to be? What are you seeing compared to what you expected?
I mean, I don't think it's hyperbole for me to say, like, this has been my life's work for the last 12 years to see those last American aircraft leave Afghanistan last week, or however long it's been now. And with that, and many other people too. And, we're a community, and we work together, and we talk and we share. But there's no celebration. No one is saying, where's my gold watch? Where's my parade? Why? How right? I mean, like it's just point Scott was getting to with the black pills you're taking. It's just sadness and anger, and that's all that I have in me is sadness and anger. The reality is that the United States government and the United States military and intelligence services, et cetera, Congress have learned their lessons, and this begins in the second half of the Barack Obama administration, where we're shifting these wars in the Muslim world to hidden wars, where we are going to use CIA and special operations forces. We're going to use that's why we have to get these drones out there, more drones, because all those things are secret. All those things are classified. The United States government has no obligation to talk about any of the wars in the Muslim world, including now the war in Afghanistan, because they are being run by classified activities. They only have to lie about them because it's all being done by CIA, JSOC, and with drones, and anything that touches any of that is classified and can't be spoken about. The use of private contractors, of using corporations. You can't FOIA a corporation. You can't submit a Freedom of Information Act against a corporation. So a lot of what corporations do, we used to say, and I'm sure Scott may have heard this working in civil affairs, being around the State Department and USAID. The joke used to be, and I'm sure it still is there, what's the most secretive organization in the U.S. government? And it's USAID. I mean, you cannot find out about anything USAID does. Any work USAID does outside of its prime contractors, they consider privileged information, and you have to literally get a court subpoena to get that information. And as everyone knows, if you don't have standing, how do you get that? I mean, So you use corporations to keep these wars hidden. They're outsourced, as well as it helps people make money. And then most importantly is you have the brown people do the fighting. You have the black people do the fighting, right? I mean, because the Americans don't care if it's black people killing black people, brown people killing brown people, because because they've been killing each other forever. Right? Isn't that the trope we hear all the time? Israel and Palestine. Oh, those people have been killing each other forever. The Africans, they've been killing each other forever. The Arabs, they've been killing, which is bullshit. But it's the trope that is sustained and no one cares. I mean, remember in 2017, Lindsey Graham, who might be, now that John McCain is dead, maybe Tom Cotton is a close second, but Lindsey Graham, who's the most hawkish voice on Capitol Hill, at least in the Senate, Lindsey Graham didn't even know that we had 1,000 soldiers in Niger, right? I mean, now maybe you don't tell Lindsey Graham because he's got a big mouth, but if anyone who's going to know about this, it's going to be someone who's supportive of that effort. And Lindsey Graham didn't even know that. I mean, so the lesson learned is to keep these wars hidden. And I think another takeaway, though, is looking at this last year and a half. What do we actually know about the Taliban? Everything we know about the Taliban has been turned on its head. February 2020, the U.S. signs an agreement with the Taliban. The Taliban say, we will not attack foreign forces at all. Everyone who is an expert on this says, oh, they're lying, you can't trust them. 18 months later, they have not attacked any foreign soldier over the last 18 months.
Right.
You see the Washington Post reports that when Kabul fell, when Ghani fled from Kabul, and all of a sudden the Taliban, who are on the outskirts of Kabul, looking at this city that they had won the war. According to the Washington Post, which according to Central Command, the United States Central Command, the Taliban actually offered the United States military to take control of Kabul for an interim period until they could stand up a government. I mean, does that jive at all with anything we've heard about the Taliban for these last 20 years? Right. Same thing, too. The Taliban protected the airport for weeks. Yeah, there was that terrible, tragic suicide bombing. The United States lost 13 Marines. The Taliban lost 30 soldiers in that attack. If people think the Taliban are some type of inhuman species, like they're from Mars, where they don't grieve the loss of their own, you're kidding yourself. They're human beings. You know, I mean, so the fact that the Taliban protected the Americans at the airport for weeks. And if you listen to what, again, General McKenzie says about the last few days of the Americans at the airport there, Hamid Karzai International, the Taliban were the only defense the Americans had, as they were packing up and leaving. You know, I mean, so does any of this make sense about who we supposedly were fighting for these last years? That these are the people, they honored an agreement not to attack us for 18 months. They offered for us to take over Kabul until they could be in a position to have an interim government. They protected us at the airport. I mean, does this make, I mean, so there's so much about these wars, that these lies about the wars, all the stories we've heard about them, it just doesn't add up. You know, and I think that's what it things that, and we all, and you and I, you, Scott, and I know this, the folks listening to this podcast know this, but it's something I think we have to really address with our fellow Americans, is that, look, I mean, we are being lied to. We're continually being lied to. We're paying the consequences for these lies. People are getting wealthy. My favorite, I hate to use the word favorite, but, I'll close on this. Prior to 2001, the wealthiest part of the United States was Silicon Valley. Before that, it was, I think it was parts of New York. Before that, it was Dallas and Tulsa because of the oil and gas, right? Before that, it was, go on and on and on, right? As the coal mining areas, et cetera, et cetera. Since 2001, or really about since 2004, 2005, I guess, the wealthiest part of the United States is the Washington, D.C. suburbs. And now, like, I'm a pinko commie leftist, right? I'm on the other side of the spectrum from Tommy. But, we both can agree that Washington, D.C., a place that only takes money and gives it to a select few, that should not be the wealthiest part of our country. Yeah, and that's what these wars have done. That's what these wars have delivered. And so the anger, the sadness and the anger that I possess, that Scott possesses, that Tommy possesses. I know, Tommy, I know you have this sadness and anger. You were never over there, but you are a compassionate, good soul, and you have that ability to feel these things. Yeah. And I think that is something that we as a people need to come together on. I mean, it's a terrible thing to come together on, these all taking black pills, as Scott said, but what is going to unite us at this point to stop it? Because at the end of the day, Tommy, I mean, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you and Scott, about what we should do with the trillions of dollars we're not spending on war. That'd be a great conversation to have. But in the meantime, we're killing people. As Scott said, it's not ending. Scott's point was so, what you said, Scott, was so articulate and so poignant about the fact that this war, about the 9/11 protests that Magnus and other people, the end of war rallies are organizing across the country, are coming after the defeat in Afghanistan, is important because, the wars continue, man. They continue.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And you are my favorite commie. Like, but you reminded me of, I was reminded and now I forgot, but I had something there. It's been a long day.
I think
I've been up for a long time right now.
If people don't realize we're taping this. We still say recording, I guess, not taping. I'm showing my age. We're recording this at it's about 11:30 Eastern. We're recording this. So
I've been up since 5.
Yeah, me too. And I didn't even have to go to work till 10, so I don't know why I got up that early, but I do, because that's what I do. I get up and I drink my coffee, and then it's just downhill from there. But yes, no, everything y'all said was absolutely on point, and that's why I wanted to have you two on. I felt like, I talked to Kyle Anselone about Afghanistan and leaving Afghanistan, and Conflicts of Interest is a great show, and but I felt like having two veterans from the wars was
specifically poignant at this point in time, and I remember what I was going to say. When I read in Fool's Errand, and I mean, I can't help but go back to Scott's book on Afghanistan because it made such a big impact on me in the way I looked at the war. I was pretty much like get out of there ASAP before I read the book. By the time I read the book, I was mad we even went. And the part that always stood out to me the most, and I don't know if either of y'all ran into this situation, was Scott was talking about how the Pashtuns thought that American soldiers were Soviet soldiers, and they were not aware of 9/11. They weren't even aware that the Soviets had ever left Afghanistan. And I was like, wait, what? Like, this makes no sense to me. And whenever that like fully registered with me as to how victimized in this sense these people were, being, these average like goat farmers, just, hillbilly types in Afghanistan, I was very upset by the way they were treated. Thank you. But yeah, no, I don't know if either of y'all ran into the Pashtuns and had that experience with those people, but I specifically remember that, and that was always like the most touching part of the entire story to me was these people don't even know what's going on. They don't even understand why the USA is on their soil. They didn't even know it was the USA. They're so caught up in their own lives and just surviving. That's all they're concerned with is surviving. And suddenly you have foreign military right in your face.
I've heard that story so many times. I don't know, and I didn't encounter anyone like that firsthand myself. But one of my friends went up to a valley in a place called Golistan, and they seemed to be remote enough that it was plausible. Let's say that the last time they had seen someone like us. And there are all these stories when you would hear stories too about, the redheaded Afghan children would be kind of referred to as like Russian, like, he was a Russian, interpreters would say things like that. But whether it's true or not, that they certainly didn't have any idea why America had to go on this war of vengeance effectively against them, and just, the fact that everything we did made their lives harder. These people that live in this hard place to survive, one of the hardest places to survive in the world. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And we did nothing but make their lives harder and give them grief for it. And, there were two things. One thing that was interesting is I was sorry to go back to I know I think all of us are fading a little bit, but I watched a documentary once. The name of it escapes me. It was called Richie Boys. And it was about French and German, mostly Jewish refugees who joined the U.S. Army and served as interpreters back in Europe as the war progressed. And a French, he had become a professor of French at like Rutgers, and I emailed him. This was while I was working at Quantico at the Civil Affairs School, and I reached out to him to kind of put a feeler, and he responded. He was like, a professor emeritus at this point, 90 years old, or in his 80s or 90s. But he told a story in the documentary. They trained actually in Maryland, which is why it was on MPT. Like they had a Camp Ritchie was the name of the camp. But he told the story about being in Normandy and interviewing a villager, and a fellow Frenchman, and saying, "Well, which way are the Germans?" You know what I mean? And we're at a fork in the road. Which way to the Germans? And the guy pointed them in the wrong direction from where the Germans were. and how mad he was at his countrymen for lying to him, because his house was near where the Germans were. And he damn sure he had gotten this far into 1944, and he damn sure wasn't about to send Americans to where the Germans were right next to his house and have it blown to shit. You know what I mean? So he lied and sent the Americans off in the wrong direction. And this interpreter was pissed. You know what I mean? Livid to this day, when he was retelling the story in his 70s. How could he have done this? He lied to us. And I was just sitting thinking, well, what would you do did you ever, the biggest lesson to me that I'm finding is that empathy is the big thing. Just think for 1 second, if you were that Afghan, if you were that Frenchman on D-Day, who's like, well, the Germans are camped out next to my house. And that's not, I've made it this far, made it through all the bombings and all this. And now the Americans are going to, as much as I might want to be liberated, the Americans are going to show up at my doorstep and blow my house down.
Right.
You know what I mean? No, thank you. You know what I mean? Best of luck to you guys, but can you go the other way? And that little bit of humanity that, people are going to make tough decisions in Afghanistan all the time. I took this lesson. I would tell Marines this all the time. You can't get mad at them when they lie to you, because until you've never walked a mile in their sandals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and they've seen 3 other rotations of Marines just like you that want to go fight the bad guys and do this. They've seen so many people come and go. They've been through hell, literally, and all we ever do is make their lives harder. So it's the kind of lesson I learned is this bit of empathy. You really got to understand people. And I guess one white pill I think I could close out with is I was saying I've been listening to local news, and the one woman who's conservative pundit kind of local news lady, she said she's reading Anand Gopal right now. I don't think she knows what she's in for.
Oh, yeah.
She said she had just started reading it, and she's like, it's about this Afghan woman, and there's an American soldier, and she was kind of laying it out there, but she clearly hadn't gotten to the real meat of the book, I think. And I hope she finishes it. But like, maybe there's there's a glimmer of hope. We're going to keep the remnant. We're going to keep the fires burning in the anti-war movement. I'm trying to find ways to keep teaching empathy to people, because I think as soon as you can understand the other person's position, it just opens a door to thinking there might be better ways to solve things than through violence. And we're not going to forget everyone listening now. And I do want to ask you guys, this can be offline, but you mentioned conflicts of interest. So I want to ask you, before we hang up, can I talk to you guys for 2 minutes about that? I'm going to be talking to Kyle this Friday.
Sure.
So I want to ask you guys.
I'd be happy to talk to you about Kyle.
Yeah, I wanted to run something by you too, especially you, Matthew, but both of you,
Sure.
if you have any ideas. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds great.
Your point on empathy, Scott, I don't think there could be a more important point to end on. While you were talking, I remember 2 stories. One that was hearsay, and the other one I took part in directly. But when I was in Iraq my second time, I remember hearing this story. It may have been apocryphal, who knows? But supposedly a bunch of Marines were walking through a field. They came across a guy in Iraqi. They said, "Have you seen any foreign fighters, sir?" And he said to them, "Yes, you." Right? I mean, so much of it. Right? I mean, like, kind of. But exactly. But then the other time is I remember one of our an Apache. We used to call them air weapons teams, the Apache gunships, and this 2 Apaches. They work in pairs, and they killed 9 members of 2 families, wiped them out, put their 30 millimeter guns right into a grove where they were, and decimated these people, destroyed them. And we went to the village that no Americans have been to in 4 or 5 years. And I remember talking with one of my counterparts, and him saying something like, well, the fact that they want to meet with us shows us that they believe with us and believe in us. And I said, we just massacred 2 of their families. Of course they're going to meet with us. I mean, like, as far as what they have lived with the last 30, at this point, 2009, 30 years of their lives, means that if we don't do what they say, we'll come back with more of our gun chips.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, while we were there, talking to when we talked to the villagers and to their folks, and we say, when was the last time you saw the Taliban? And they said, the last time we saw the Taliban was the last time you guys were here 4 years ago. I mean, and it just strikes you that, look, we're the driving factor in this. We're the reason the Taliban can claim they are a national liberation movement.
Yeah.
I mean, we are to get back to your question, Tommy, about the Russians. By the time I got there in 2009, no, I think those stories at that point were may have been true in 02, 03, 04. A roommate of mine from years before that, a guy who, as a lieutenant, received the Silver Star for his actions in Afghanistan. He talked about things like that in the east of Afghanistan. But again, whether or not he encountered it directly or it was secondary, but I think the scope of it, the point of what you're getting at, Tommy, remains true. And I think the best depiction of that is in, 2010 or 2011. Someone did a survey of, and this is in Scott's book, and Scott talks about it all the time. Someone did a survey of men in Helmand province, and of course men, because you can't interview the women, you can't talk to the women.
Right. Yeah.
And again, so 9-10 years after we're in Afghanistan, Helmand is a buzzsaw. That is where the Americans and the British take almost all their casualties there. And I do not know if the Americans, if we took more casualties in Kandahar or we took more casualties in Helmand. But anyway, for the Marine Corps, that was the Marine Corps' buzzsaw.
Right.
By the way, 2010, 2011, 9-10 years after we're there, a survey is done of Afghan men, and it's something like 95% of them have never heard of 9/11. So what our young men and women are doing there, what guys like Scott have to be wearing Kevlar diapers for, because if you go back and look, if folks are not familiar with this, go back, just Google it. Put the calendar settings on Google between 2010, 2012. Type in things like Walter Reed, Bethesda. What's the name of the American hospital in Germany?
Not Landstuhl.
Landstuhl. Yeah, Landstuhl. You flew in through Ramstein, you went to Landstuhl. And so Landstuhl, put in those search terms, testicles, and you will see that it was sickening how many American men there are now who don't have their testicles, who went home to wives, to girlfriends. What kind of fucking future do you think there are? You guys brought up Songen before. I think Scott brought up Songen, which is one of the which is where the British took their most casualties in Helmand. And I don't know if it was the same for the Marine Corps, but if it wasn't, near the top, Songen. And this is an Anand Gopal story. He spends his time in Songen. But I remember being, Scott brought up the Marine Corps Unit 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines that was in Songen that took terrible casualties there. And I remember one time, this was about 2012, I guess, and I was at a bar in Northern Virginia, in Arlington, a place called Whitlow's, which is a very popular place. You go, they got a big bar on the roof, like a tiki bar thing. You go there, if you're young, you go there to meet chicks. If you're old like me, you go there to look at the chicks. But if you're young, you go there to meet the chicks, right? And there were some Marines, and one of these kids was in a wheelchair. And I will never forget this. I will never forget me thinking, what the fuck is he doing here? No girl's going to fuck him. He's in a wheelchair. And that's the reality for so many of these young men who came home. And women to a degree, but most of the casualties were men, and they come home and they are different. They are changed, not just in the extreme, like where they lost their testicles and everything, but even too with the traumatic brain injury, with the post-traumatic stress disorder, with the moral injury, and all that leads to substance abuse and domestic violence, on and on and on. The devastation of futures that came from these wars. And everyone listening to this, if you made it this far, you've heard us discuss all this, and it still doesn't make any sense. And there are people who are living with that every day. And it's just, so get back to Scott's bitter black pill moment. Yeah, absolutely. That's where I think a lot of us are.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great place to leave it. I wanna let you guys both plug anything y'all have to plug. So go for it, Scott.
Yeah. So if you have a chance, check out End Damn Wars. I think showing up for that protest, getting out on the street, I think having people see that it's not all over, actually physically being somewhere where you can be seen holding a sign is important. That's next weekend. And then if you can, bear with me, but please tune in to my podcast, Why I'm Anti-War. If you want to be on the show and tell me any reason you're anti-war, at Anti-War Podcast, antiwarpodcast@gmail.com. You can find me and share your story why you're anti-war. And I need to have you on sometime, Tommy.
I'll have to write out a script for myself for that.
That'd be beautiful.
Because there's so many reasons.
Yeah, I'll take them all.
So
the cool thing about Scott's podcast, if you guys haven't listened to it, is he gets into a lot of like what kind of cultural influences helped you become anti-war. Like, what movies did you watch? What books did you read? What music sticks in your head that resonates with you, that makes you feel this way? And there's a lot of that. And I certainly enjoyed my time talking with Scott on that podcast. And things to plug, there are a number of veterans groups out there that do really great work. I would say stuff like Semper Fi Fund is probably my favorite group in terms of organizations that I believe really spend their dollars well and wisely. There's another group called Project Canine Hero that these guys and gals, they rescue military and law enforcement working dogs that otherwise would be put down because of their circumstances, and they give them homes. This has a real special part in my life because I worked with the dogs in Iraq. In my second time there, I worked with them quite a bit, so they're just a part of me. What we did to those animals, that lingers with me, but also too, and Tommy and Scott are big dog people. Anyone who's listening to this podcast knows Tommy loves dogs. So Project Canine Hero is a fantastic resource. And then, in terms of I also am part of a group called Eisenhower Media Network that brings together people who have been a part of the military who are, let's just say, dissatisfied with our current predicaments. And if you want to support Eisenhower Media Network, that would be fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah. And anybody who's listening that is a veteran of either of these wars or knows somebody who is a veteran of either of these wars, don't be afraid to reach out to me, Tommy Salmons at Gmail, and I'm sure I can get you in contact with Scott or Matthew at any time. Both these guys are accessible and just great dudes all around. So I appreciate both of y'all. It's been a long conversation and pretty intense at times. And I think people are going to get a lot out of it. So I really appreciate both of you for this.
Thanks, Tommy. Appreciate it.
All right. So we're going to stop the recording as soon as I get this fucking email off of my screen.
Please leave that.
It always
leave this on. Don't cut this
I will. I don't edit this shit. All right. We're stopping.
Said you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you. With the flag you wave just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, it seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumps down all around propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. Well, as we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Well, it's time to change the channel. It's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. Of those who are to blame, and we'll stack them up like cordwood, watch them sizzle on the flames for good. Well, as we all just stand in line waiting for some kind of Robin Hood, our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood. Thank you.